Hey everyone, welcome to Youth Poems. My name is Craig, and I'm here with Jack Hadfield, a reporter for the Publica out in Britain. Thanks so much for joining us, Jack. We really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. It's great to be on.
Thanks so much. So, what's your background and how did you get interested in politics?
Well, I think I've been interested in politics really from quite a young age. My parents both conservative. Well, my dad, I suppose, has been a member of every political party and voted for most of the major ones in every UK elections. But I started getting around interested in politics around the age of 15, 16. So 2012, 2013, 2014. I remember Gamergate. Was quite one of my first intros into a lot of the online kind of culture war stuff, which has become more of a moniker for things. I suppose we can apply culture war to Gamergate in retrospect now. But yeah, I've been involved since 2015 or so. I used to work for I used to campaign for the Conservative Party here in the UK. And through a long series of things that I won't go into complete detail now, I ended up working for Breitbart in 2015. That was my first sort of foray into real journalism. Just literally on my 19th birthday, I wrote my first article for them. So I was a relatively early supporter of Donald Trump. I was I was a big fan of Rand Paul before Trump ran. When I was converted to him around November, December 2015. So I've been on the Trump MAGA train for it's almost 10 years next year. But yeah, I've been interested in politics really from a young age, and really I've been writing involved in this kind of dissident journalism sphere for pretty much my entire adult life.
Wow, okay, very nice. Sounds like you and I have a similar background in terms of our political beginnings.
Mm.
I started out in high school door knocking for local candidates in my area up in Massachusetts, another U.S. state. So great to see that you're also engaged early on and really leaning into your journalism career. Speaking of which, what is the focus of your reporting and what's an interesting finding that you've made of late?
Well, previously, a lot of my reporting had been focused on politics, as it is a lot of American politics. So obviously, be looking at the Republican primaries, as it was previously in 2016, and over there, Donald Trump, and really seeing what was actually going on the political sphere. Right now, at the Publica, we do less of what you would call politics, as it partisan politics, and we focus a lot more on socio-cultural issues. So, for example, just last week, I wrote about I wrote about a rape that happened in Paris by five African phenotype men, I believe was the reporting. So a lot of migrant-related issues. And literally just on Thursday, which happened in my town, about city of Manchester in the UK, there was an incident at Manchester Airport on Tuesday, where there's a bunch of ethnic Pakistani men who were involved in an incident with the police, where the police stomped on the head of one of them. So there was a protest here on Thursday, right in the centre of Manchester, where I was able to cover that. And then in Rochdale, which is just north of Manchester, where the men were originally from. So, they were like stopping the trams, they were chanting Black Lives Matter, even though there are no black men involved in the instance at all. Just this your standard leftist nonsense. But right now, as I said, I do kind of miss the politics side of things, in terms of elections and all that kind of stuff. But doing the more socio-cultural stuff, it's always a lot more interesting, and I feel it can reach more people rather than just who are stuck to one side of the aisle.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like a lot of parallels between what's going on here in the US and the UK in terms of these radical protests we saw in DC, for example, the other day, the pro-Hamas faction rioting and getting out of control. And now it sounds like in the Manchester airport, people are getting out of control and attacking the police. So a lot of parallels there. Pivoting more towards the election side of things, though, you recently had an election on July 4th, and that was a big upheaval in the political system. The main party, the Tories, did not do nearly as well as they did in 2019. they, as a center-right movement that consistently betrays conservatives, how would you describe their last 14 years in power as a betrayal to the right?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people would say, oh, the Conservatives have been in power for 14 years, which is true. But there's been a lot of different sort of eras of the Conservatives under the different prime ministers that we've had. Obviously, it started with David Cameron from 2010 to 2016. Obviously, he allowed the Brexit referendum to happen, and then because he was on the side of Remain, he then lost, and then it was Theresa May who took over, and following her, of course, was Boris Johnson, who had the massive 2019 majority. Then following him, Liz Truss for about a month, and now then Rishi Sunak. And a lot of them are very distinctive size of things. So, for example, Cameron, he's very much more on the sort of liberal one nation conservative. He portrayed himself as the heir to Blair, Tony Blair, of course, the Labour Prime Minister who won the landslide in 1997. He was there to clean up the act of the Conservatives. They were no longer the nasty party. If you wanted to hug a hoodie, which was his slogans around 2008, 2009. So that was more trying to get more of a sort of socially liberal, but right wing, economically agenda coming through. But then obviously Brexit really changed a lot of that. Theresa May was kind of that interim period, and then Boris, took charge in 2019 because he was this big Brexiteer. He campaigned for it. And then he won this massive, 80-seat majority in 2019 on two things. I voted for him on two things, which was to get Brexit done. And to get rid of our equivalent of the deep state, which are the civil servants, the NGO complex that existed here, which it exists in the government as much as it does in the United States, to foil, to upset any right winger who comes into power, to upset any of their policies being implemented. So Boris won it on this anti-immigration, pro-Brexit, anti-deep state agenda. And then, COVID completely ruined that. And what we've had is, a lot of my friends now talk about the Boris wave, which is the Boris wave of migration, which is insane. We've actually had supposedly even more immigrants coming over during Boris's and then Rishi Sunak's tenure under the people who supposedly vote for Brexit, supposedly more hardline than David Cameron. We've had even more come over than even some during the peak of the Blair years. So what's happened? Why the Conservatives were completely ousted at this last election is because they ran on a campaign getting Brexit done, which they did, in fairness, but primarily, again, reducing immigration, and they completely failed. And they had even more immigration than before. So most of the Conservatives simply didn't turn out. If you look at this Labour majority that they had, around 150 or so seat majority, I can't remember the exact figures, that wasn't due to Labour picking up all of these votes. In fact, the turnout was down to around 52%. Or so, one of the lowest we've had in years. And that was because all the Conservatives decided, well, screw this, I'm staying at home, I'm not going to vote for the Conservatives, because they completely ruined the country. They didn't do what they promised to do. And that's why you've seen now Reform obviously getting 5 MPs in this Parliament, 6 if you count their electoral pact for the TUV in Northern Ireland, which is a whole kettle of fish that I won't open now. But, a lot of people thought the Reform could even get, 50, 60, 70 MPs maybe, depending on how bad the Conservatives did. I'm actually quite glad that they only got 5, because a lot of the candidates were rushed in pretty much at the last moment. So we didn't really know what caliber MPs they were going to be. Whereas right now, the 5 that we have are all very high standard individuals. Of course, Nigel Farage obviously finally being an MP after the 10 or so plus years of elections that he's competed in. So we're really now set up for a reform revolution come 2029. Hopefully the Conservative Party will get completely pushed out, and Reform will be the main right-wing party in the UK.
Excellent. Okay. And I hear a lot about the 0 seats movement for the Conservative Party and wanting to really push them out due to the failures on immigration and on these other issues that voters wanted them to deliver on, but rather failed with COVID and immigration and other areas. Speaking of immigration, you signed a letter urging Reform UK to freeze immigration. Could you explain how mass immigration harms Britain's youth?
Yeah, well, I think there's quite a few ways. The number one and number two, would you say, the most obvious indicators of this are crime crime rates are really being driven by mass migration. People who've come over the country don't understand the culture of the laws, and a lot of them, as Donald Trump famously said, some of them are good people, but they are bringing drugs and crime. That's completely true, and you can see like London has become a lot less safe. It used to be in the 1990s, or we looked at New York and how dangerous that was, and now New York seems a comparable, utopia compared to how London is now. Now, certainly on muggings, on other very small petty crimes, and now even murders. I think we may have now crossed New York in that. I might not have my figures correct, but it's certainly worse than it was. And of course, number two is on housing. So obviously, like America has a housing issue, but we have as a quite tiny island, really, terrible house prices. As somebody who's 27, I'm basically on the borderline of Zoomer and millennial. It's almost impossible for me to buy a house anywhere that's even, not in the far-flung reaches of the countryside. Certainly, I have no chance to buy a decent place in the middle of a big city, as a young professional. And certainly even not in London. I'm up in Manchester, and my rent here would probably be 3 to 4 times the price in London for a similarly sized apartment. And the problem is that immigrants who come into the UK will be given social housing in London, be free, completely free by the government, or at least very, very low subsidized rents. And that's not even to mention the asylum seekers who come over here and are placed directly into accommodation by the government. So I think there's some insane statistic, which is, I believe, over 50% of social housing in our nation's capital is being used by people who weren't even born in the UK. So this doesn't even count second or third generation immigrants. This is first generation immigrants. 50% of the social housing stock in London is taken by people who were not born in this country. And that completely rubs it into people who have been paying taxes here, and especially for young people who really, if you want to make something of yourself, you have to go to London. Well, Manchester is now becoming similar something to that, but this is being completely crossed out. We have a population explosion, and it's completely different by immigration. Now, there's a lot of other ways immigration hurts us, but those are the two key factors, I would say, especially for young people.
Mm-hmm. Understandable. And I think we're seeing similar effects in the U.S. regarding crime and housing prices, certainly harming us in both countries, where it makes things unaffordable and the streets more unsafe. Perhaps that's why Reform UK outperformed the Tories among 18 to 24-year-olds. Would you agree that that's what led Britain's youth to turn right, or would you say there were other factors as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely some of that, but I think the Zoomers as they are, I believe that, I can't remember the exact figures, but certainly a poll I saw before the election had the Conservatives on about 7% in the 18 to 24 demographic, and then around 15% for Reform, which was about the national average for Reform. So, so you would think Reform are this right-wing party, like they're not going to get young people, and yet they're polling at about the same level as the national average, even in those who are just, a much younger generation. So some of that certainly is to do with housing and immigration. A lot of it is to do with what people, of course, talk about, woke. Obviously, young white guys, young British guys, this has been the case over the past 10 years. They're being told, oh, you're evil, you're an oppressor, you're racist, you're sexist, you're this, that, just for existing. There's, of course, all the nonsense that goes on with schools, with leftist education. So there's definitely a factor within that, for sure. But, you see the reason why they've been railing against that, some of it is because, of course, a lot of young people don't listen to the mainstream media. An example I give of this in terms of Zoomers being aware that the mainstream media didn't have their best interests at heart is a few years ago when the Wall Street Journal called PewDiePie a white supremacist. Of course, all the young people who watched him realized that this was complete nonsense, and they realized that, of course, well, the mainstream media actually is lying to us. And you see a lot, I think, on TikTok really does have an effect on this. So Nigel Farage, very, very popular on TikTok, he's tapped in to young people, kind of in a similar way that John McEntee, obviously of fake right stuff, has in the States. He's got a very big TikTok following. So I think that social media where Reform really does well on the places that young people actually see and visit, and yeah, it really does. I think it really does change their minds.
Excellent. Yeah, sounds like things are going very well in terms of Nigel and Reform UK's strategy to reach out to young people. Would you say that politicians in the UK generally care about the concerns of young people? And what could they do to better address our needs?
Mm. Um, I don't think they do it at all. I certainly don't think the Conservatives do. You could see this, with one of their policies in the manifesto, which Rishi Sunak said that, 18-year-olds will have to do national service. And you think, because they have to give back. And like, hang on, we sacrificed 2 years of our lives. For me, I was in my mid-20s at the time of lockdown. That's one of the, the key years that you have in your life that you can never get back. We sacrificed this to make sure that old people didn't die of coronavirus. Even though I don't think a lockdown did anything anyway, but that was the entire point. Now we're being told we need to give back again. No, there's the same thing again with like the triple, quadruple lock on pensions. Pensioners, the people who have, who already have houses, who are going up massive prices, like in their assets, actually being severely rich. Oh, they're the people that need their income protected, according to the Conservatives? No, I don't think so. There was no real, apart from, something to reform, there was no real pro-youth agenda. For example, slashing income tax for people under the age of 30. I believe Reform were looking into some of this kind of things. I can't remember exactly the details on it. Reform are really the most pro-youth party. But, certainly the Conservatives and Labour, at least, they only cared about the people who they thought turn out to vote, which is the older voters. So no, there's the Reform are really the only people I think care about young people's issues in the UK at all.
Okay, interesting. And hopefully Reform can expand so that you have better representation for young people, because it seems as though the established parties, as you said, don't care about our interests. They're not looking to help young people. It's all about the people who already have assets and are well off versus the people just starting out in their lives who are trying to get their foot in the door and can't because of mass migration, crime, and other issues. So certainly sad to see. Any closing thoughts as far as things you'd like people to know about the UK political system?
Well, this is something I talked about with my friends a lot, is that I think the UK will be the last country to go abased, quote unquote. That we are a very sort of anti-revolutionary country, who have the same system, of parliament, since Simon de Montfort, around the 1200s, which is 800 years ago, which is almost, 3 times older than your country over there. Whereas, obviously America was built on the spirit of revolution. You can see a lot with it with Trump coming in, and now, of course, Europe. Like in Europe, you can see that, for example, in Germany, the AfD is not only polling well in young people, but in second or in first place in something and that is the quote-unquote dissident/far-right party. Same with the Rassemblement National in France, same in the Netherlands, same in Italy. So the UK, we are going to be, I think, the last to turn around Western civilization. Our elites have been the same elites for the past 1,000 years. So I don't think we'll ever have, the same sort of upcoming revolution that, America and Western Europe might have. But it seems like that, our elites are there because they're survivors. So what I can predict in the next coming, half century or so is if the problems do get fixed, in America and Europe via the ousting of the other elites, I think our elites are far more likely to fall in line. And so I don't think they're as political as some of the others that you have, certainly in America, for example. So I can see the UK being the last to fall in line under the based New World Order that's hopefully coming up in the next century. Either that or we're all screwed across the world.
Yeah, certainly hoping that, with the Trump win, other countries and our friends in Europe and the UK can look to the US for inspiration, and we can have a global right-wing utopia and, explosion of conservative policies that really help people of our age, all ages, and are continuing to expand prosperity for all. With that being said, really appreciate your thoughts and insight, Jack. Highly appreciated. Thanks so much for coming on the show. We upload every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 1 p.m. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you'd like to reach out to us, feel free at geekbombs@electoralrepublicans.com. Thanks so much.
Thank you.